Yes, looks good. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, so I'm going to cover some of the key elements of the EUDR, and I'm going to talk through the guidance that WWF has developed around the EUDR, and then just talk a little bit about what we call leadership practices in relation to combating deforestation and forest degradation, kind of going above and beyond the minimum that the law requires for compliance, which is already a lot. And, trying to really ideas for trying to really get after the problems that the UDR is intended to solve. So, key elements. Um, I don't know how much you guys know about UDR, so I guess this presentation is going to assume that you don't know that much.
That's the right place to start.
Is that the right place to start?
Yeah,
Okay, good. I wasn't sure. Yeah, and so these are the stated objectives of the EUDR. Um, and the regulation, it was passed a couple of years ago as part of the European Union's kind of grand ambitions around a environmental agenda, kind of their equivalent of a Green New Deal. Um, and yeah, it has these really amazing ambitions around eliminating the EU's contribution or minimizing their contribution to deforestation and forest degradation worldwide. So by now you will have read these objectives. I'll move to the next slide. So the commodities that are in scope for the EUDR are palm oil, soy, timber, cattle. That includes beef and leather, cocoa, coffee, and rubber. It's not every single product made from those commodities. There's a list of products by HS code that are in scope, but it's a lot of the products that are made from these commodities, or of course the raw commodity itself. And whether or not the deforestation or degradation in the country of origin is legal or illegal, it is illegal to place or trade on the European Union market products that are linked to that deforestation or degradation. And of course, if there's any illegality in the supply chain, it's also illegal. Um, the EUDR subsumes the European Union Timber Regulation, which is the EU equivalent of the Lacey Act, basically, which has been around for a while. And so the EUTR has now been wrapped into the EUDR, but it just addressed illegal timber. And obviously the scope of this is quite a bit wider. So some of the key terms in the EUDR. So deforestation is conversion of forest to agricultural use only. If you convert a forest for a suburb, it's not considered deforestation for the purposes of the EUDR, rightly or wrongly. Forest degradation, it's an interesting one. So the quoting from the regulation, structural changes to forest cover, which takes the form of the conversion of primary forests to, or naturally regenerating forests into plantation forests or other wooded land. But it's the plantation forest part that is notable. Um, the definition of plantations is where the trees are of they're all one or two species, and they're the same age and they're evenly spaced. So, basically what we would call semi-natural tree farms in the US, if you're converting natural forests to what we often call tree farm here, like in, Douglas fir in the Northwest or pine in the Southeast, that would be deemed degradation under the UDR's definitions. And then primary forests into planted forests, the definition of planted forest is a forest where the majority of the trees are planted. And so it's not even, as simple, I guess, in terms of species composition, age classifications as a plantation forest would be. It's, somewhere in between. So a stricter set of restrictions on the conversion of primary. And primary forests, of course, are basically forests that are undisturbed by human activity at any meaningful scale. So, old growth. Because sure, familiar with that. Some other key terms, operators in the EUDR, those are first placers of products on the EU market. So those would be the importers, and the EUDR also covers producers within the EU. And so it would be the first entity to place the raw commodity on the market, whether that's timber or soy or what have you. Then there's this term downstream operators, and these are companies who take an in-scope commodity or product and manufacturing step, a transformation step where it changes from one HS code classification to another. And then there are traders who basically buy and sell. And there are different levels of requirements for large companies and small and medium enterprises, or SMEs. Keep going. Competent authorities. These are agencies within the member states that are responsible for enforcing the law. So there's different competent authorities in each country. And then there's this concept of a plot, and there's the definition there before you. It's kind of a key term, and it, I guess, within the forestry world, it could be considered like a forest management unit. Excuse me. Dog is going to keep barking until I let him in. Okay, and yeah, there are definitions in the second article of the regulation. Some key elements, so products that are linked to deforestation or degradation post December 31st, 2020 are the ones that are banned. If the deforestation or degradation happened before that, the regulation doesn't cover it. These phase-in dates have changed since this presentation was put together. About a month ago, the European Commission announced that they intend to delay the implementation of the regulation a year. And in fact, there are now signs that potentially there could be more changes than that. And this is going to be a political football that gets kicked around a little bit, but it looks like it's definitely going to be delayed a year. I already said products need to be legal. There's a component that it doesn't require it in so many words, but it does require a consultation of indigenous peoples who are impacted by the production of the commodities, which is, kind of a big deal, and also very complicated as to how you actually do it. But that's in there. So one of the big changes that the regulation is driving is this requirement on the declaration, the identification and the declaration of the geolocations of the plots, the source farms or forests, along with dates or a date range of harvest. And so when an operator places in-scope products on the EU market, they need to submit a due diligence form. And along with that in the due diligence form, they say, we've done our due diligence. We've determined there's negligible risk for any of the prohibited activity on this shipment that we're placing on the market. And here's the list of geolocations of all the source plots for this product. So, I mean, you can imagine how complicated that could be if it's, say, a book. So we'll get into that a little bit later. You need to conduct due diligence. You need to have sufficient knowledge of what it is that you're bringing in, where you can make this determination of low risk or negligible risk and be on the hook legally if they find out that it wasn't. So you need to be able to then show them, well, look, I did all this due diligence and you shouldn't penalize me. And then another important component is that the European Commission is supposed to go through a process to designate all producer countries in these three different categories of low, standard, and high risk. And companies that are designated standard and high risk, there's a higher compliance burden than products that come from companies that are countries that are designated low risk. So, depending on where you are in the value chain and whether you're a first placer operator or a downstream operator or a trader, the obligations differ somewhat. And I think this flow chart gives you an idea that it's complex, so I'm not going to walk through this. This is one of the things that's detailed in our step-by-step guide. One of the resources in our suite of guidance resources. So suffice it to say that, some people face different obligations than others and steeper obligations. There's three fundamental components to exercising due diligence: information gathering, assessing risk on the basis of the information that you've gathered, and then when you find non-negligible risk, taking steps to mitigate that risk. And of course, it's a continuous process. It's unending. It's never kind of one and done. Okay, right. So here's the lower compliance burden. If the product comes from a low risk country, then you don't have to conduct due diligence. You only have to provide the geolocations. That's all. But you're still required to assess risk, gather information, and assess risk that there could be mixing along the supply chain of acceptable and unacceptable material. So I talked about the due diligence statement, which you have to register before you place the product on the market. And yeah, I mean, this is fairly obvious, I guess, but clearly your compliance with this regulation, if you're an operator and there's several tiers of the supply chain above you and between you and the forest or farm, your due diligence is only going to be as good as your suppliers' due diligence, information gathering. I mean, you're basically reliant on what people are doing up the supply chain. And so there's steps that we recommend that companies do in engaging their suppliers and trying to reach up their supply chain to get that cooperation. And there's a lot of detail in our step-by-step guide. There are very heavy penalties if they catch you breaking the regulation, and they should be listed here, and they're not coming up for some reason. Huh. All right, we'll have a glitch, and I don't remember what they are offhand, but they're steep. I think it's like 5% of the overall turnover of the company. It's like steep. So maybe that's something that I can dig up when we get into Q&A and discussion afterwards. Stakeholders being able to submit substantiated concerns. So like the watchdogs, the NGOs can say, hey, these companies are all saying that there's no deforestation happening in this geography, but guess what? It is, or there's human rights violations. The indigenous peoples aren't being consulted. And then it's something that the competent authority needs to investigate. So here's some additional resources. I can share a PDF of this presentation afterwards. So if you want to look at any of that. Okay, going quickly through our guidance on EUDR. So the key resource is this step-by-step guide for business, and it's roughly an 80-page document. We went pretty deep, so it's there if you need it. And Xander, I think you said you already have shared the URL where you can download these documents. We also have produced a number of annexes. There's a readiness assessment, kind of just an initial sort of gap analysis that you could do if you are subject to the regulation. There is some recommendations around how you might set up your due diligence system in the second annex. And then we have a number of commodity-specific annexes. We don't have them for every single commodity. We didn't do them for coffee, soy, and cattle, beef, leather, although hopefully we'll get to those at some point. But we did them for all the others. We have them for timber and rubber and cocoa and palm oil. And so those are recommendations that are specific to those commodities. Let's see. So these are the basic high-level steps that we have in the step-by-step guide, and then there's a lot of sub-steps underneath each of these. I am not going to talk through all of this. This is high level what's in step one. So you can get a sense of what's in here, some of the sub-steps. Start by conducting that readiness assessment, draft indicative supply chain scenarios, consult key staff. So we really try to go through it step by step. Very important to get the buy-in from your leadership and the resources that you're going to need if you are the one responsible for implementing this. And then we also recommend making sure that you have a public-facing policy that aligns with the requirements of EUDR. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Accountability Framework Initiative, but this is a reference and a set of resources that a bunch of NGOs have developed so that everyone is pushing the companies to do the same thing in regard to developing and implementing policies for deforestation-free sourcing. So that's an important reference. The longest section of the guidance is about developing and maintaining a due diligence system. So, there's a bunch of different procedures that clearly need to be included given what's in the regulation. And then we make suggestions that seem logical that aren't actually explicit. So one of those is a procedure for information gathering. Obviously you need to get after this stuff well in advance. I already talked about you being reliant on suppliers and sub-suppliers. This is one that I think that's important. So one thing that we talk about in the guidance is this concept of primary suppliers. And usually that's going to be primary manufacturers, but in some cases they're like aggregators who aren't actually processing. So say a company that's buying soy from a lot of sources and just putting them in silos and then selling it on. But these are companies that are large, that are well-resourced, that are selling into international markets, that are sourcing from a specific supply area or geography, and are really positioned to actually understand what's happening there, do real risk assessment, take most risk mitigation measures, and they're pretty much the only ones who can gather the plot information and pass it up the chain. And so when we're talking to big downstream companies like retailers who we work with a lot, like say an Amazon, we're saying, well, if you really want to comply with this regulation, you need to work up your global supply chains and identify all the primary suppliers and then take a risk-based approach to addressing them, right? Starting with the ones that are in the geographies where deforestation and degradation are known problems. And that's where you should be focusing your resources. Because if you're not getting cooperation from them and you don't have confidence in them, yeah, it almost doesn't matter what's happening elsewhere in the supply chain. Well, of course it matters, but it matters less. Declarations in excess. This is a really important part of it. Of course, the intention of the regulation is for that list of plots to be that's submitted to be as exact as possible. But we certainly know in the forest products industry, and it's true in rubber and palm and cocoa and these other commodities as well, there's often a lot of mixing in the supply chain. And so going back to the book example, your Amazon, you're placing books in the EU market. I mean, book has at least two kinds of paper for the cover and for the inside. And then the book manufacturer, they may not be buying all their paper from one paper manufacturer. It might be more than one. The paper manufacturers could be buying from multiple pulp mills, and the pulp mills could, like in the US, buying from a supply area that has hundreds, thousands of landowners where it's constantly shifting. Oh, and they're also buying sawmill residuals whose supply base of landowners is a lot and constantly changing. And so if you are now expected to submit the geolocations for the source plots for what's in that book, you are forced to say, here's a really long list of potential sources for the fiber in this book. And we don't know exactly which ones are the source for this particular fiber, but we know it's a subset of this long list. And we've done our due diligence and have determined that it's negligible risk for all of them. Now, the problem is if they find out that there was deforestation or degradation in any single one of those plots, it makes the entire shipment illegal. So the more specific companies can be, the better. And that said, it's a reality of the regulation. WWF doesn't like them, but you also can't push water uphill. What else? Oh, there's this language throughout the regulation that is ambiguous. Like, for information, you need to gather adequately conclusive and verifiable information that the products are deforestation free. What's adequate? What's conclusive? What's verifiable? Not defined. So gradually, the commission has been coming out with more and more guidance in the forms of these FAQs. So there is a bit more specificity coming out, but there's still a lot of room for interpretation. And I think that's going to be true for a while. In our step-by-step guide, we put together, we offer up suggestions of what, we think could be adequate. And that's about the best that we have right now. Okay, that's procedure for information gathering. Moving through this quickly, we have a procedure for risk assessment. And yeah, I mean, basically, there's a bunch of criteria against which you need to do the risk assessment, which is in one of the articles. And we recommend, of course, focusing in on those areas where there's known risk. And that's where you're really gonna, dig deep in terms of seeking information and collecting evidence. And then you form a conclusion. If you're going to place it on the market, it's got to be that it's negligible risk. And then you are going to have to repeat risk assessments for products and sources. We say at least annually. If something changes and it changes, and you need to do it more frequently. Here's some of the criteria that are in the regulation. There you can see the piece around indigenous peoples, but also governance. And then there's supply chain risk. You're supposed to say, oh, I've got a really complicated supply chain, and guess what? The wood flooring is manufactured in China, and I know there's a lot of laundering of illegal wood in China, and so you base it on you have to assess both origin and supply chain risk. And then there's a procedure for risk mitigation. There's lots of potential approaches to risk mitigation. The regulation does not stipulate much detail about what risk mitigation steps you should take. It just says you got to do it. So in our step-by-step guide, we make a number of suggestions. You can see some of them here. This is not a comprehensive list. So I'm going to keep going. And then the last step is the implementation of the due diligence system that you've set up, including submitting these due diligence statements. Okay, I'm going to go to the last part, and looks like we're doing okay for time, so we should have a good amount of time for Q&A and discussion. And here we're talking about the leadership practices that WWF recommends that kind of goes above and beyond, trying to really go to the root of deforestation and degradation. So these are contained in an annex at the end of the step-by-step guide, Annex 1. And this is what we have there currently. So there's detail on each one of these: collective action, first mile approaches. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The use of, there's just a proliferation of digital tools that are intended to help companies comply with the regulation. We could talk a bit more about that. Certification, of course. There's frameworks like the Science-Based Targets Initiative, Flag, Forest, Land, and Agriculture. I don't know if you guys know about that. Science-Based Targets for Nature. Investing in nature-based solutions. This is a very big deal for WWF. We do a lot of work both on projects that are landscape level, that are, really trying to conserve high priority places, high biodiversity, high carbon stock, as well as nurture reforestation, sustainable livelihoods, buy-in by governments, adequate financing. So really trying to protect and restore nature at scale. And then scientific testing, so like wood ID testing, stable isotope ratio analysis, trace element analysis, DNA analysis, testing methods that can verify a declaration of species or origin for wood products, provided that there's adequate reference data. So just quickly on a couple of these first mile approaches, the idea here, it goes back to this notion that the primary supplier is in the best position to really both gather information, do risk assessment, and conduct risk mitigation. And that there are a number of things that we suggest that that primary supplier can do in the first mile, which is from the farmer forest to that first point of aggregation and processing. So in some cases, there's going to be intermediaries like log yards, or, in the case of palm, a lot of times there's traders who aggregate a bunch of palm fruit and send it on to the palm oil mill, which is going to be the primary supplier. But yeah, the idea is that this is really where we need to concentrate, because if we're going to end deforestation, it's really going to have to be implemented by these primary suppliers, and of course be helpful if the government authorities did things too. And governments are taking action in response to this regulation to try to reduce the burden on their industries, right? And you can imagine the companies that are clamoring for the government to make it easier for them. So that's to the good. I talked about scientific testing. If this is a topic you guys want to talk more about, we certainly can. Collective action. So these are things like what we call jurisdictional approaches. This is something that we do with our landscapes, our nature-based solutions landscapes. It's just trying to get a bunch of important actors from that landscape together to develop and get buy-in to a long-term, adequately financed plan for making it happen. And so that would include like big companies who are sourcing from there or producing from there. It would include local government authorities. It would include local communities and indigenous peoples, representatives of them, a multi-stakeholder approach that's trying to address problems and opportunities at a jurisdictional scale, at a significant scale. Let's see, what else? I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Benefits to engaging in these leadership practices. This is stuff that we pitch to the big companies who we talk to. I think these are all fair points, and these are drivers for all of them. So, and of course, there's the minimum compliance, but these are benefits for taking these steps that go above and beyond. And yeah, it's on the website. I think, oh, here's some some web pages that are go-tos for getting the most current information on the regulation that are managed by the European Commission. Oh, and there's a multi-stakeholder platform, which also provides a lot of, they have regular meetings, and I don't know how much you guys are going to be interested in going this deep, but there's a lot of documents, a lot of resources out there. Yeah, this is out of date, and that's it.
Thank you, Jason. It you great introduction. And my brain is churning with the complexities of it all. Um, uh, let's see. One thought I had is we've had some conversations within the guild that we might be able to help on the very small niche of collecting some of the sort of sample material for some of that DNA or stable isotope analysis. Because we have members all across the US who, are out cutting trees, etc. It might be a good opportunity to contribute to that sort of database. So, um, just that's maybe a little side item just to
Well,
note.
let me respond to that.
Yeah,
So I don't know, have you heard of World Forest ID?
vaguely, yeah.
So they are a nonprofit that is, its whole purpose is to gather reference samples, do the testing. It's got to be certain protocols to make sure that it's valid. And they're associated like with Kew Gardens and a bunch of research institutions of different parts of the world who are deep into this testing and developing the methods and the technologies. And so they are taking the reference data and putting it into an open access database. So labs all over the world can conduct the tests, and for the test to be useful, you need to be able to test, you need to be able to compare your result to the reference data, right? Without
Right.
reference data, it's useless. So if you guys want to help by generating these reference samples and reference data, it'd be awesome. I'm working with World Forest ID on a project which involves getting some of the big companies that I work with and that they work with together to drive this wood testing, which we regard as very promising from a number of standpoints. And so if you guys decide to pursue that, I'll hook you up.
Great. Great. Yeah, I think, I guess one of the reasons I latched onto that is thinking through this whole issue of geolocation of plots. It just feels so difficult, and the some of that testing could leapfrog that. It's not now, but that sort of seems like 10 years from now that might be, because I think the end, like where we want to go, all makes sense. I think everybody is on board with the deforestation regulations, but the mechanisms are so complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to those, and feel free, folks, to add questions into the chat box here. Um, but I guess first off, where does the US fall in low standard or high risk?
The European Commission hasn't completed that benchmarking.
Oh, okay. Because
I'm sure
that'll,
that I imagine the US is going to be low risk. The big question I have is Canada, where there's a lot of logging of primary forests, and I do not see how they are going to be able to avoid being designated as standard or high risk for degradation, not for deforestation. And that could be a big deal for the Canadians.
if so, this was a nuance that maybe this is the right audience to dig into. So if you're logging in primary forest, but you're allowing it to naturally regenerate, does that avoid? I was looking at those definitions, and it seems like that might get you through.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, you can't turn it into a planted forest.
But if
So it's
you're,
just kind of weird because the planning could help it regenerate. And I
yeah,
mean, there's other complexities there too that we've been like delving into. And, I think there's real problems here with these definitions and how they're going to play out in the real world. Like for instance, so they say you can't convert natural forest into a plantation. Here's the definition of plantation, all evenly spaced, same age. All right, well, what if it's, not like a just clear cutting and replanting? What if it's variable retention?
right,
What if it's fuzzy? How fuzzy does it have to be before there's like a threshold question, right? I mean, if you have one tree that you left behind, well, now it's not all the same age class, right? So there's definitely things there that are still unclear to me anyway, and I don't think they've been clarified. So
right.
yeah.
And how much does say using sort of the gold standard of FSC certification, um, it seems like that would meet many of your requirements for the EUDR, but not, for example, necessarily plot locations or right. So am I, maybe I just turn it over to you. How, in your view, knowing FSC regs and certification, if you're already FSC certified, what's sort of the gap that's obvious to you? And obviously there are a lot of complexities, I realize, but maybe sort of big bundles.
Right. Well, so FSC has invested heavily in evolving the system so that it aligns with UDR compliance, with the UDR requirements. And so with the changes that they have introduced in a very, very tight time frame for FSC, because FSC usually moves very slowly. But in this case, they threw a ton of resources at it and they made changes to their international generic indicators, which, are what all the forest management standards, I mean, for generally the forest management standards are already there.
Right.
Although you can do some harvesting in primary forests under FSC. And so, again, there's that question of, the planted forest question, but they have just there and they've introduced changes into their controlled wood system, which is the set of rules that apply to non-certified wood that could be mixed with certified wood and mixed products. And so they've introduced changes to that suite of standards and resources to make it align with the UDR. And so when it comes to being able to make a defensible claim of negligible risk, FSC has tried to get to a place where if it's an FSC certified product, you as an operator can say with confidence it's negligible risk. The thing of it is that no certification system, the regulation, they're explicit about this, there's no green lane, meaning that there's no like, okay, you did this, you're good. So if they find that FSC wasn't good enough and there's still material coming into an FSC supply chain, the operator or the company subject to the regulation is still on the hook. So now PFC, SFI are, of course, engaged in the same process of trying to align. They have to, as you can imagine, just, you know, and to me, it seems like that's a lot more challenging. The gap
Hmm.
between, like, say, what SFI allows and what FSC allows, there's a bigger gap in terms of what the regulation allows and doesn't allow. And so I guess we kind of have to wait and see how that plays out. What FSC does not deliver is against the geolocation requirement.
Right.
It's got a requirement for FPIC, and so it actually delivers against the consultation of indigenous peoples, which is rare. But yeah, the geolocations, that still needs to be passed up the chain. And FSC has this FSC blockchain. I think they're calling it FSC Trace now, which is intended to something that, companies can opt into, and it's intended to be a technological platform, a digital platform where that information can be aggregated and passed on along with, making sure that volumes are correct, that, people aren't fabricating FSC product out of thin air, which has been a problem in FSC. But the thing is, it's still not ready for prime time. And in order for it to work, everyone in the supply chain has to be on the platform, or you're missing information. And so for the time being, the geolocation information for certified products is happening the same way it is for non-certified, meaning whoever the operator is having to do whatever they can, right? They're just relying on their supply chain, and they're relying on the base of the supply. They're relying on those primary suppliers to gather the information and pass it down the line. And like in the case of paper, that list is just going to get longer and longer. You're the pulp mill. You're going to go to the sawmills and say, I need all the geolocations of the sources of your logs. And I'm going to add in the geolocations of all the landowners that I'm buying pulpwood from. And now I've got this big list. And so each time I sell a batch of pulp, I'm here, paper manufacturer, here's the list. And then the paper manufacturer needs to add that list to the list that they get from the next pulp mill. And if they can't get that information, then you're out of compliance. And this is one of the reasons that the regulation is being delayed, the implementation.
Yeah.
But on the plus side, this is driving total transformation of these global industries that now you could say, well, in the US, this is overkill. And actually, one of the changes that the European Parliament is now considering is to say, if it's a low risk country, you don't need to meet the geolocation requirement. This is the result of intensive lobbying by the American Forest and Paper Association, among other actors. But the thing about that is, number one, it creates an unlevel playing field between rich countries and poor countries. And I think we want better traceability and transparency in the forest products industry.
Yeah. Uh, I can certainly see why they're lobbying. I can also see advocating for better traceability.
Yeah.
Shona has a couple of good questions in here. So I think you've touched on this. Oh, I guess she says, besides geolocation, what do you think the biggest challenges for U.S. timber exporters to the EU are? What's number two besides geolocation?
Yeah. And I just have to say hi, Shona. And I don't know if you know this about Shona, but she interned for us at Eco Timber in the 90s. So we go way back. Biggest challenges for US timber exporters. I think, the geolocation requirement is the biggest one, I would say. And then also this definition around degradation. I think that's got to be very tough. Like, if you are exporting to the EU a product where there's a lot of mixing, aggregation, sorts, and you have this long list of geolocations, how do you determine for each of those plots that degradation hasn't occurred? For instance, that they haven't gone in and clear cuts natural secondary forest and replaced it with a monoculture. Like, how do you track that in all of them? That's and in the most recent FAQ that they released, they did say, do your due diligence. And if it turns out down the line, you've done adequate due diligence, and it turns out down the line that this happens, you're okay. And you could look at things like forest management plans or legislation. One of the companies that we work with, we have a pre-competitive forum for companies that we work with to talk about EUDR. And something that one of them shared is that they are a big pulp and paper company, and they know all the plots that they're doing the geolocation requirement. And they are asking every single landowner that their fiber is ultimately coming from, what do you plan to do? And then they're documenting the response. And they're saying, if if you're logging this in this way, or you are planning to log it and turn it into corn, then we can't accept your material. And then they're documenting that they asked that question. They're documenting the answer that they got, and then that's what they would show the competent authorities if they. I don't know. I mean, the way I look at it, these competent authorities are going to be so overwhelmed, and I expect they're going to be focusing on places where the problems are big, but that's a problem. Let's see, which approaches you think? I think certification is an excellent approach for sure. That's kind of a plug and play, at least they want it to be. Some jurisdictions in the US to help. So I don't know of jurisdictions that are doing it. I do believe that there's been some work on this within, like I know the American Hardwood Export Council tried to do some stuff for all of their members of that whole industry. And they invested in trying to make it easier to develop some tools and resources. And then it didn't work so well. And then the American Forest and Paper Association was like, you should be joining us in trying to resist and change this regulation. Don't come up with solutions. And they wound up coming around to that, unfortunately. So anyway, I don't know of that much happening in the US.
Yeah, certainly unlikely given the Tuesday for it to happen at the federal level. Um, so I guess a couple thoughts here. I see that Shona's working with Chris Gibbons on the national FSC national risk assessment
Good.
to respond to the EUDR. And so maybe we'll when it's appropriate, when that's sort of at the public stage, have a follow-up webinar. And I also think that maybe somebody like Amy Clark Eagle from FSC might be willing to share kind of that connection between FSC standards and EUDR. I think that would be helpful for a lot of guild folks. So maybe that's a way we can follow up. It's sort of uh, now that we have a little bit of time, the 2025, to continue to think about and work on this stuff. Seems like it's something that's important to follow up on for all guild folks will be engaged in this at all different stages. So,
Cool.
um, great. Well, maybe unless Jason, there's something else that you feel is key to add as we close up here, we should wrap it here. It does feel like this is at least, from our perspective, an earlier first step in a long conversation. I know people have been involved for decades at this point, but something that we'll need to track more closely. And yeah, so thanks so much for getting us deep in on the details.
Good. You're very welcome.